Good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock, so we are ready to get started. I believe looks from my vantage point here like we have a fairly full house. I want to thank all the members of the council and the Planning Commission for being here tonight for this joint meeting. I'd like to thank our Parks and Recreation Director, Susan Muir, for putting together the work to present this evening. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person tonight. Our early fruit today ended up cutting in about 4.5 hours late, so we are processing fruit out at Remy Wines. But I am, you have my ears and my mind, and I am going to ask our council president tonight to run the meeting so that I'm not trying to see and understand who would like to speak next and who has questions. I think it would be very inefficient. And so with that, I will turn the meeting over to Council President Garvin, and thank you all again. I look forward to hearing all of your conversation tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, it's 6:01 p.m., and I'll call the Joint City Council and McMinnville Planning Commission work session meeting to order. And now I'll turn it over to Susan Muir, our Park and Rec Director, to introduce tonight's topic.
Thank you. Happy to be here tonight. We've been in front of each of you separately as commissions and councils talking about the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan update project that we've been working on. We're at a really exciting point tonight. We're starting to see the vision. We're starting to see things come together. And I want to introduce our consultant team from MIG who have been working with us on this. John Phoenix is here from MIG. Hi, John. And Ellie Schaefer from MIG are here. And they are going to facilitate the meeting tonight and engage in the interactive part. And if anybody needs any help when we get to the interactive part, just raise your hand and I'll come over and see if I can help you. So with that, I'll turn it right over to you, John. I know you have a big agenda and we want to hear a lot of good discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. And thank you, members of the Council and Planning Commission, for having us tonight. We're very excited. Got a lot to share and a lot to get through. So we'll get right to it. Again, I'm John Phoenix. I'm a planner and principal with MIG. And we're a consulting firm in Portland, Oregon. And we're helping the city of McMinnville update the Parks, Recreation, Open Space Plan. So I'm going to share my screen and get our presentation going. So just 1 second. All right. So what are we going to cover tonight? We've got a lot of information to share with you. Hopefully you've all had a chance
John,
to
review is
read
on
through
presenter.
Your packet. Do I have the wrong screen going?
You're on the presenter mode.
There we go. That's the wrong one. Okay. Thank you, Susan.
Yep, let's
how's that?
Great.
Coming up?
Yep.
Great, thank you. So we're going to give you an update on what we've been doing over the summer. I know we met pretty recently back in June with Planning Commission and City Council separately. And hopefully you've had a chance to review the packet. We're going to talk about that tonight, the draft strategic framework summary, discussion of that. And then we have an interactive exercise. We think it's a lot of fun. We're going to talk about potential projects that'll be going into the draft plan. So we want to make sure we have some time for that as well. So as a refresher, what's the purpose of this plan? Why are we doing this project? A couple reasons listed here. Number one, things change. 1999 was the last time the plan was updated, and obviously there's been a lot of growth and change in McMinnville. And there are a lot of assets as part of the Parks and Recreation system. Parks, facilities, programs, you name it. So we want to get a handle on what's changed, what's in that inventory, and what condition is it in. We'll document needs and priorities. We've had a lot of great community outreach. I'll highlight in just a second. This is a community-driven, community-supported plan. So our goal is to help hear from the community, organize all those thoughts, and find ways to provide recommendations that the city can act on. And this is a long-term plan. The 1999 plan looked out 20 years into the horizon. We're going to be doing the same with this updated plan, 20 plus years into the future. Who knows what that'll hold, but we have a lot of good information to provide some strong recommendations. And probably most importantly, this plan is a really great tool and vehicle to prepare the city for funding opportunities. It's served the city well in the past, and it will continue to do so with an updated plan. This process has been created and started and continues with an eye towards equity. And so I thought it's important to define what do we mean by equity using the National Recreation and Park Association term. So it's defined as the just and fair quantity, proximity, and connections to quality parks and green spaces, recreation facilities, as well as programs that are safe, inclusive, culturally relevant, and welcoming to everyone. So we think that's a great definition, and that's what we've been using ever since we got started in everything we do. So we're thinking about equity in terms of how does the city provide parks and recreation services. So with that as the context, where are we with the schedule? We have a 4-phased process. We started about a year ago, inventorying conditions, and then getting into community engagement. I'll talk about that in a second, as I mentioned. We heard from thousands of McMinnville residents about things they'd like to see in the park system. We've interacted with council, with planning commission, and with the DEIAC committee as part of the advisory team for this process. In fact, we just met last week to talk about the similar items we're talking about tonight. So that puts us squarely into what we call the strategy phase, recommendations. Those are part of what we're talking about tonight. That will tie into specific projects, specific recommendations. Obviously, funding, cost will be part of that. And this project also includes an update to the city's parks system development charges that we're also taking a look at. And that'll be a separate meeting to discuss that process. So that'll all come together in a draft plan. You'll have a chance to review later this fall into winter when we get closer to an adoptable plan into 2024. So some community engagement overview. As I mentioned, we've heard from a lot of folks. We had a really great response with our survey that we had earlier, over 2,300 survey respondents. So excellent turnout. We heard from a wide cross-section of the community. We've had in-person and online engagement. We had interviews. We've had focus groups with members of schools, the downtown, tourism-focused groups, and Yamhill County. We've had Spanish-speaking outreach with UNIDOS. We've met with high school students. And of course, as I mentioned, we've met with Council, Planning Commission, and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee all throughout the process. So there isn't one outreach tool, one thing that the city and the consultant team have been doing to hang our hat on and say, check the box. It's an ongoing process, and it's multi-layered. And that's important to start to build understanding for the future vision. So this gets us back up to speed with current day when we met with both Planning Commission and Council back in June. And at that meeting, if you remember, we provided the current Parks and Recreation and Open Space vision and asked you what you thought. You know, what's changed? What would you like to see improved or added? And here's what we heard back from you. And this is just an abbreviation of some of the bigger picture items that we heard. But one of the first things we've been hearing is reinvestment in the existing system. So taking care of aging facilities, maintenance being a critical issue, and taking care of all these assets that make the park system so important. Advancing social equity and thinking about an equitable park system. We've looked at park access, not just by numbers or condition, but where are some of these things located? And more importantly, where are parts of McMinnville that don't have these opportunities? They don't have that equitable access. You told us about the importance of opportunities for all ages, young kids, older kids, teens, tweens, young adults, older adults, and everything in between. So making that part of the system. Safety, can't talk more about safety. We hear a lot about that, not just in McMinnville, but throughout Oregon, throughout the country where we do a lot of work. There's a lot of concerns with safety in public spaces. So we need to be considerate of creating safer spaces for everyone. Who's using parks? How do they become more welcoming? And what can we do to make that happen? Maintenance, again, I think I wanted to put that in here twice just to stress just how important that is. And then we talked about sustainability, both in the design of parks and spaces and even programs, but also in operations. Thinking about what we're adding and what we're doing, how do we sustain that into the future? And then the last kind of item that we talked about together is connections, trail connections, connectivity across the city, how important that is to get around, not relying on a car, for example, but being able to walk and bike safely to get to parks and recreation. So there's a lot more we covered, but I thought this was a good refresher to remember what we talked about. So the packet that hopefully you all had a chance to review, it's a draft of what we're calling the strategic framework, and we're fully expecting to hear how do we refine that, what are some changes you'd like to see. But first, what is the strategic framework? Well, this is essentially the guide of the parks plan. What does this tell the city? How does it guide everything that comes forward, from future park recommendations to improvements to programming to maintenance and so on? So it includes 3 critical items: the vision, the goals, and the objectives. So the vision is the big picture idea, the envisioned future of what are we going to be looking like 20 years from now. The goals describe how we're going to achieve the vision, and then the objectives provide more specific direction to advance goals for long-range change. So the vision statement is included in your packet tonight. I won't read line by line, but I wanted to call out what we've been hearing from the community and from you all that form the vision. So we mentioned inclusive and interconnected parks, safety, places and programs that are welcoming, fun and opportunities for all ages, healthy lifestyles, natural habitats, and community cohesion. In a vibrant economy, parks and recreation do indeed contribute to the local economy. So we want to stress that as well. McMinnville has a unique heritage and culture that parks and recreation can highlight and showcase. And then equity for everyone in every neighborhood, with places and opportunities for future generations. So the goals, how do we reach this vision? How do we achieve this vision? There isn't any one way. There are actually many different things that need to happen. And so we summarize that with 7 goals. So those are listed here. We've got equitable park access, community cohesion, providing a welcoming system, clean and safe parks, supporting diverse recreation opportunities, celebrating and preserving nature, and then increasing off-street trail connections. And these are just kind of the paraphrased titles for those goals. There's more direction included in your packet tonight. So to keep us going, I do want to hear from members of Planning Commission and City Council on your thoughts, but I do want to just highlight a few key objectives we thought were worth noting in the packet in the draft strategic framework. So how do we advance the vision and the goals? So I just wanted to list a few. The first is what we've been hearing a lot about, which is close proximity to parks and recreation. So in this case, we're calling for a 10-minute walk distance from most neighborhoods to reach a park or a recreation opportunity. So again, the numeric-based standards, those don't do enough justice alone to reach this goal of having close parks, having parks that are accessible to all. Incorporating barrier-free and universal play areas, water play and nature play. This kind of gets back to the varied recreation opportunities and accessible spaces. So spaces that are accessible and fun for everyone, people with disabilities and without, of all kinds. River access, water access. We've heard a lot about how important that is to McMinnville residents. So looking at connecting to the South Yamhill River as a major recreation asset. And then expanding pedestrian and bicycle connectivity that links McMinnville's parks and open spaces. So a lot of great connections that are out there, and a lot of improvements, ways that we need to improve on safe connections. So a few others that I wanted to highlight. How do we make parks and recreation spaces safer? How do we make them more welcoming? Well, the first is to consider programming. There's the design aspect, but there's also programming. So we're recommending taking a hard look at how spaces are programmed to generate more activity through different times of the day, and that includes weekdays, evenings, and so on. So really taking a look at how do we increase use of parks through programming. Continuing to sponsor community-wide events that promote interaction. McMinnville is well known for some really great community events, and parks are at the center of that. So really striving to continue on that track. Maintenance. This one really strikes at maintenance. We've worked with maintenance staff at the city to identify ways of improving maintenance. What are some thresholds, some objectives that we can start looking at? And this one is important. This is looking at a minimum level across the system that we can use as the park system continues to grow and advance. Where do we want to hold ourselves as a minimum standard? So this recommendation is an average of 5,000 per developed acre across the system. And then the last objective I wanted to highlight is just really great communication. It's not enough to have this planning process to involve thousands of people. It has to keep going and has to continue. So we want to make sure we're providing those opportunities for ongoing two-way communication with the community, both to talk about accomplishments, but also challenges. Those are very important and they go hand in hand. So with that, I will stop the presentation for a minute, and I'd like to turn it back over to members of the Planning Commission and City Council to get your thoughts. Does this draft strategic framework you're seeing, does it reflect community needs? Do you have some changes? Are there some questions that I can help with, our team can help with, to understand these goals, objectives, and the vision? So I'd like to turn it back over to you. One reminder, we would be very happy to take your detailed comments. If you have, detailed notes, if you have a, grammar edit or something like that, please send those to Susan. She'll make sure she gets those to us. But for the sake of time, if you have any big picture comments or questions, we'd love to take that.
Yeah, so at this time, I'll open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions, raise your hand. Call on you.
I always have questions. This may be too nitty-gritty, but as I was going through the material you provided for us, so thank you for the all that information. I was thinking about costs for everything. We have a limited amount of money, so how do we spread it out equitably, and how do we spread it out so that we get the most bang for our buck? Have you guys looked at QR codes for signage for trails to link into, so instead of just having lots of physical signs, just having smaller signs with QR codes that might be cheaper?
Yes, and unfortunately, we've really only been able to do that on temporary signs, for example, for the surveys and other things, but I think that's definitely in the future, is to figure out how we can better communicate. I've seen it used on trails so that you can get the history of the trail. Yes, QR codes are a way to go, and they do take up less maintenance and less space.
Yeah, I was thinking, because you were talking about, with wildlife and everything, I was like, if we can make this cheaper, how do we do that? So I was wondering if that was thought of. And then also, I know we have some big ticket items that we would like to look at. Is there a possible way to break that up? So if, a piece of property comes available, the city would like to go along the Yamhill River, because I know a variety of us would love to see a corridor along that. Is that possible to set aside that without having to break down and set up the trails right away, so that over time that happens? Is that a goal? Is it a goal, or is it something we immediately have to do?
So if I understand the question, we do have access to funds that we could purchase a property if an amazing opportunity came up and we wanted to act on it quickly. We have several park areas that have either been given to us or purchased. Actually, we do have one that's purchased that are not developed yet. So yeah, we do have some of that flexibility and hope to build a little bit more in.
Okay, super. Yeah. And then the last question I have is, this was also brought up by friends, trying to coordinate with the user agreement with the school district. Has any city within the state of Oregon town have anything like that? Are we breaking new ground and or how is this working? I know I've seen it in other cities, but outside of Oregon.
And John may have a better statewide and even national perspective on that. I will say we do have cooperative agreement, one cooperative agreement with the school district, but it's mostly geared towards indoor spaces. And so it allows us to sort of say, in priority order, this, for city facilities, city goes first, school district goes second, and then kind of the general population is third. And we prioritize each other, recognizing that that's great for our community when we share facilities. That does not translate in the format that it's into outdoor spaces very well right now, particularly not the informal play areas that a lot of people rely on. So yeah, that will be a part of this. And John, you might be able to jump in with a bigger perspective.
Yeah, Susan, that's typically what we see as well, the relationship for indoor facilities, since those are, there aren't many of those in an average community, and two, that's really where the demand comes from. So that's what we typically see. As far as outdoor spaces, I'd say the most common relationship is use of outdoor school facilities during non-school hours. That's the typical policy that we see. But it is extremely varied, as you can imagine, in most places that we see. But I would say that the McMinnville example is probably fairly common in terms of how that relationship works, and right of refusal between the district and the city.
Okay, thank you.
And then Councilor Payne had her hand up.
Thank you. I guess I'm inquiring about A4, the design of parks and facilities for safety, because as counselors, when we're on the dais, we hear often about folks mentioning park safety and their comfort in using the parks. I guess I'm surprised to hear that hasn't been one of the more significant brought up issues.
The safety in parks is...
Yeah, A4, it's on... Yeah, so it didn't, I guess, hit on the first slide where we were kind of ticking through the priority type issues. So I guess I want some clarity on, is it a priority issue?
Yes, and you will help us prioritize even more how important that is to our community. John, anything to add?
No, I think you're right. That might have been an error on our part not to highlight that in the previous slide, as you mentioned. Absolutely, yeah. Park safety is a big priority, and I think that's what we want to hear more about tonight. Is what are those specific improvements or projects that might get us, closer towards that initiative? But I think we definitely, from what we hear, it's, it doesn't matter what the park looks like. If it's not safe, it's not going to get a lot of use. So we have been hearing a lot about safety as a priority. Including lately with our DEIAC meeting last week, addressing, who are the folks using parks and how are we addressing their concerns for park safety?
Thank you. 2 more questions. So the first is on A8, the design for sustainability water quality. I love the mention of water, but as a fire wife, I'm going to go with, is there any potential for fire safe landscaping and ensuring, and it falls under maintenance to some degree, I realize, as we're trimming trees and maintaining landscape with mulch or rock and things like that. I just want to be clear that if that's a priority or not a priority.
Yes, it is. In fact, in our exercise coming up next, we actually have wildfire management, fire-wise landscaping as an option for a project, so absolutely.
Thank you. And then my last question on B2, and this would be more for you, Susan, is the connection to the Yamhill River. Has Visit McMinnville had any input on that? Because that was that's a big focus that they're seeming to want to tackle too.
Yes, there are a lot of conversations going on related to how we can improve river access between the county, Visit McMinnville, the state. There's a lot of projects up and down the river that are working on that. So when I got here, that was the thing I heard the most from people 6 years ago was, why don't we have river access here in McMinnville? So we hear it loud and clear, and I think it's going to be hopefully a collaborative project that we can all partner on.
Councilor Geary, and then I'll go to you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much for the information. On the slide about what should we prioritize, while I'm how the implementation and thinking about phasing and rolling out I'm usually tempted to spend more time thinking about how we improve the water quality and the water access and how we build that out and imagine the river walk and how beautiful it's going to be in 40 years for other people to enjoy. It's probably not in my time. We'll get that really activated. And so what I think of when I think of what and how should we prioritize the implementation of the PROS plan, I see it as sort of a quickly divergent path. One is we've done a great job to date, in most of the build out of the 99 plan of getting that. We haven't done a great job of keeping pace and having enough now and having enough to keep pace with our current growth model. So I see it as a two-way split. One track is aggressively get more land to bank and reserve for parks and open spaces in the future as we grow, sort of new activated spaces. And the other path being look at all of the half-built parks that we currently have, either intentionally that they're in floodplain or unbuildable land, and figure out ways to activate the unactivated spots, or we only have so much money, we can only put something on half of this park. The J. Pearsons of the J. Pearson parks of the world. Sorry, not the J. Pearsons of the world, the J. Pearson parks of the world, where we have half a park that's ready to go and undeveloped. And so I see it sort of as a two-prong immediate approach of one, developing the other half of all the parks we have and improving the playgrounds and things that we have, and then the other half being vigorously grab new land and plan for how to activate those, not let the future hold up the current improvements we need to make as well. So that's sort of my answer to what and how should we prioritize the implementation of the PROS plan. You could put that on one sticky note, that'd be great. Thanks.
Commissioner Murray?
Yeah, I just had a quick question when it comes to restrooms. Are they just assumed across the board there? Or, I know that there's reinvestment discussions and for existing structures that have restrooms, but for instance, like the after hours play, I go to my local elementary school and my kids like to play after hours. There are no restrooms, and we've even been there and there is a porta potty and my kids are in need, but it's locked and we're far from home and it's an emergency. So what can we do there?
Yes, and that comes up in particular if you look at the map on the last page of your packet. You can see, we talk about deserts. You can see the park desert in the middle of north part of McMinnville, where we rely on schools, and we have gotten calls from family members that live right there and say, when we say the closest playground to use at the school, but there's no bathrooms. So generally, we do think about that when we're constructing new parks, and we're even talking about replacing existing facilities and what path we might be on that. But that's part of this in terms of defining what type of park would get what type of amenities. So yeah, we know it's a problem. It's actually specifically came up in the community outreach that we need more restrooms in parks.
And then would you have authority or community kind of cooperation to do that within school areas?
We will definitely explore that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right now, we don't have that authority, but it's certainly, I think, the council's been improving the relationship with the school board and all sorts of opportunities, so I think it's something we should pursue. Yeah.
Can I know I'm not in the queue, but can I follow up to the restroom piece, if I may, Garv? Thanks. And John, maybe jump in, or Susan, on the restroom part, because I had that same, I think, just moving forward as a public amenity, a basic human need all open spaces and parks should provide is the opportunity to use restroom. In the neighborhood park assumption, it assumes that it's used by the neighbors such that we don't need to provide a bathroom because it's users only in the neighborhood for a walkable distance. And so but the current thought process is what's designated as a neighborhood park doesn't get a bathroom. Is that correct?
That is I will say we have been inconsistent with it. If you look at Thompson, for example, J. Pearson is another one where we have put in restrooms, but that's the concept with the neighborhood park. They are serving the walkable surrounding area, and they can have amenities that they can reach back at their homes. But that really also gets down into the specific park planning when you get to a particular park planning, what that neighborhood wants. John, anything to add?
No, Susan, I think that's a great way to respond to that. It does typically mean that it's serving a neighborhood. It's probably not too far to walk back home to use a private restroom, but it does depend on the different design and character of a park. If it gets a lot of use, if it has something unique to other neighborhood parks that may be attracting other folks, that could require the need for a restroom at that location. So it's dependent on design, location, a few other things, but typically in most park systems, the expectation is something like a community park would have a restroom. You're drawing people from further distances. They're probably driving or taking transit, versus a neighborhood park, which is serving a neighborhood. It's more intended for the local needs who could be close by to use their own restroom.
And I would just add, this is the part in the process where if that's something that's really important to you all, to make sure that even neighborhood parks where possible have restrooms, that's exactly the kind of stuff that we want to hear.
Commissioner Murray still, and then we'll go to Councilor Chenoweth, Councilor Peralta, and then Dan will be up after that.
Just clarification, when you say neighborhood parks, is that also around the 10-minute walk, quarter to half mile? Is that the definition of neighborhood park?
Yes. John, do you want to talk about the definitions of the parks?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that we've been working on is updating McMinnville's park type classifications. That is really the backbone of a park system, of a parks plan, because it informs everything that we're planning and designing for. So the character of the park, the maintenance of it, future improvements, and so on. So really, kind of a quick synopsis, we've got kind of at the biggest scale, we've got a community park, dancer park, city park. So really you've got community-wide draw. The expectation is it's attracting folks from all over the city and potentially beyond, especially if you have like a big event, something along those lines, a unique facility, a big skate park, a destination play area, those types of things. Neighborhood park, smaller scale, again, it's intended to serve the local community. So you're not going to have a unique facility that's going to draw people from all over the city. It's really going to be more traditional to a, play field, play area, maybe a picnic facility, potentially a restroom. And then we've got, McMinnville has mini parks or play areas that are really just intended for kind of the immediate adjacent neighbors. We don't recommend those park types into the future, but that's kind of been the development pattern in the past, and McMinnville has several of those. Then we have linear parks, essentially a trail corridor. Sometimes in McMinnville's case, especially, you've got a play area, picnic area, seating area that is off adjacent to that trail. Again, pretty unique in terms of design and use. And then open space, green space, and greenways, a different category, range of different opportunities, really. These are kind of a combination of natural open space, protection for wildlife habitat, with some access for residents, so trails, potentially picnicking, and so on. So we've got these different categories, and again, that's what we're using to update the parks plan, and we'll have different kind of standards and recommendations for each park type going forward.
And I think to answer your question really directly, a community park could meet the needs of a neighborhood park. So when you look at that walk shed, it's really access to a park, but at Discovery Meadows, the neighbors all around there use that regularly, and that serves the same purpose, and it's also a destination, so that it can apply to access to a park would be all of the above that John just went through.
I would just like to point out that a 10-minute walk or bike has not been proven to be effective when you have a 5-year-old.
Any other questions, Commissioner Murray? Councilor Chenoweth?
Yes, can you, on A2 and A3, can you talk to me a little bit about where as a city we are currently with this goal to attain this amount of acreage and this specificity of facilities at each location? Where are we as a city? And so how much are we behind already to what's being adopted in this A2 and A3?
Yeah, sure. Well, before I get to the direct answer to that question, it's a very good one. I first need to give a little bit of context for McMinnville's current plan and things that were going on in 1999 with the level of service standards. And at that point, most park agencies across the country took a lot of guidance from NRPA, which we referenced earlier, National Recreation and Park Association. And at that time, they had pretty specific guidelines for what park agencies should be requiring. So that was really where a lot of those standards came from. The problem is they don't really address some of the things we've already talked about tonight: access, quality, lots of those kinds of things. It really just got to a number. So, any kind of numeric number. So as a result, over the years since 1999, park agencies have shied away from solely relying on those numbers. It's not to say that they're not anymore, but they're also looking at other indicators, which is why we have a 10-minute walk, for example. So more about access as well as quality. What are you going to find when you get there, kind of thing. Keeping that in mind as well. So getting back to your specific question, you can see in A2 and A3, we still have recommendations for a metric. So the parkland level of service is a goal. It's 14 acres per 1,000 population total, and we have that broken down into 2 acres per 1,000 for neighborhood parks as one goal, and 6 acres per 1,000 for community parks as another. And then we've got linear parks, open space, and natural areas, another 6 acres per 1,000. So right now, I don't have the number pulled up in front of me. I believe the current inventory that we have, and it's continuing to be adjusted, it's, I believe, 8.8 acres per 1,000. That's the current level of service that the city of McMinnville has, inclusive of all park types. So it's falling short of the goal, but what we've been hearing throughout the planning process is the need to retain that standard. It's a high bar, but we've been hearing a lot about keeping that standard going. Answering your second question about A3, similar types of guidelines, level of service for park facilities. These do, well, I should say these are based on metrics, again, from NRPA. Very helpful guidance looking at park systems, park agencies across the country, in particular looking at cities like the size of McMinnville. So same population, same type of park system. So these are looking at metrics from similar park systems and saying, we have a need for these facilities here locally. Where should we be? What are those benchmarks from comparable communities? So the needs assessment that we've produced, I believe it's on the website. We've got specific facility numbers that would be needed to come closer to these metrics that you see in A3. So the short answer is these are guidelines, these are goals. The park facility standards are based on comparable metrics, including community needs. So what we've been hearing as far as need for more basketball courts, rectangular courts, sports fields, and so on. So trying to move the metric to get closer to meeting those targets. It's also growth-based, obviously. So as McMinnville continues to grow, this is an objective that keeps up with that pace of growth.
I guess the reason I'm kind of drawing to that is I'm a short person and I don't like really high bars. And so if we set the high bar so high that we can't even jump to reach it, I worry that we're putting ourselves in a position we can't even come close to. And given the finite issues that we're facing with land supply, I worry that we may be putting an objective that is just unreachable given Oregon's land use planning climate. So I just kind of wanted to draw that out. The other question I had is with D2. Talk to me about how much, I see it's a 21% increase from the current average. For somebody who's not quick with numbers, what does that actually represent in dollars at the end of the day that we're talking about for a goal for increased spending for park maintenance?
$39.50. That's what it is currently. 21% increase, and it takes it to $5,000. Currently, it's at $39.50. $3,950
Per acre.
Right, but total, what does that end up looking like to the budget?
I can look that up in the actual city budget out of the Public Works Department. I don't have that number off the top of my head.
Okay, if you could, and I could probably do the same thing later. I just was looking for an actual total on what that really translates out to. When we have it in such a small way as per acre, that doesn't really tell me how that impacts the budget. So, thank you.
And just to remind everybody, we do have a webpage set up, McMinnvilleParksPlan.com, that has those numbers from the brief number 1 that talks about the acreages and that sort of stuff. So that's always a resource as well.
And I did want to acknowledge, I see the mayor's hand, so I got you in the queue to call on mayor. Just a minute. Any other questions, Councilor Chenoweth?
No, I'm good because I know that there's going to be some great questions that are still coming. So I'll let others and maybe come back if there's still something left.
All right, Councilor Peralta, you still have some questions?
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Mayor. Council President. Just elevated you. Sorry, Remy. Okay, so in 1999 we did the previous, or the city at that time, previous parks plan. When did they fund the plan?
In terms of the capital bond, the $9 million capital bond went out, I think, in 2000 or 2001.
Okay, and what percentage of that plan roughly did the $9 million fund?
I've looked that up before because I was quite curious myself, and I know it's below half. But we also had the complete financing look, and the 1999 plan also did tee up grants, opportunities for outside funding, which this one will as well. So it's I would say the adjustment never got made to the 1999 capital improvement plan. One of the goals that I know many of us that have capital improvement plans at the city have for these is to bring them forward as part of your budget process so that you will have a 6-year rolling capital improvement plan that will also allow you to adjust the operational needs in the budget for like park maintenance in addition to looking at the overall capital costs and where the funding comes from that. So we're all looking forward to having that be one cohesive process with the budget.
So it's a 20-year bond, and we completed less than half of the plan under the bond. Do you remember roughly when did the money run out from the bond, or do we know?
We did. I believe we did use some of the bond money on the J. Pearson Neighborhood Park, and we also got.
What year was that?
That was 2017 and 18.
So there was still money left that long, because I thought we were out a lot earlier.
I think there's. The SDC fund and the park bond fund both moved together, and so some of the money from SDCs would be eligible to use on certain projects. So it was a mix on most projects. So it's not like we spent all the bond money first and then moved to SDCs. We would blend them together in a park project depending on which funding they qualified for.
Got it. So it's not just bonding that we're going to do. We're going to mix that with SDCs and then outside grants and funding. Okay.
Yeah. And John, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the way the CIP will be laid out to include what percentage of each project will be eligible for each different type of funding. I guess I just did lay it out for you.
No, good question, Susan. Yeah, so as part of the plan, of course, it's one thing to identify these projects and priorities, but funding is going to be part of that as well. Within the capital improvement plan, we will be identifying potential funding sources, including, what percentage of that is SDC eligible, so capacity enhancing, potential grant opportunities, and other funding mechanisms that could be used to take some of those projects on. So it is going to be based in reality, when it gets into the plan format.
Yeah, I
so-
appreciate that because, I just feel like whatever plan we come up with, it can look great on paper, but if we don't actually put the resources in to accomplish the things that we set out in the plan, there's no point in including them. I mean, we would have a river walk from Joe Dancer to Linfield, right, and to downtown if the previous plan had been completed, which would be a tremendous asset for our community today. And that could have been completed in the last 20 years and we could all be enjoying it. And so I'm mindful of Councilor Geary's comment that we're planning for 40 years in the future, which I think is right, but I just think we need to make sure we put in sufficient resources for whatever we say that we're going to do. Thank you for the data, too. Okay, so we have limited funding and we have some existing parks that are not being utilized. What part of town have we identified like any specific parts of town that are really park deserts? Like what, because I have my can we see a map with the worst of the worst?
And I think, John, are we jumping to the very last exercise you have and pulling the map up maybe?
I am, I'll stop.
We do. If you'd like, we could pull the map up. We do have that as part of the second portion of the presentation.
No, then I'll stop on that line. Sorry, we'll just do that when you get to it. Then the only other comment that I had on the A, B, and C sections, which I thought was really helpful for framing this, is that you had A3, which talked about the number of certain types of amenities per population. And the only comment that I have there is that I go and by the parks regularly when they're playing pickleball, and they use up all the tennis courts. I just feel like that number is really low relative to the kind of club and intensity that we have in the community. Relative to, like, because I go by the tennis courts and they're not at all being used for tennis. They're all being used for that. And there's dozens of people. So.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Councilor Peralta?
No, thanks.
All right. Dan, you're up.
Yeah, Councilor Peralta was cheating off my paper for a moment. So.
What?
He actually asked a few of my questions, but I had a few things. Number one, I did want to bump the bathroom comment. I've been the parent that has completed the impromptu 2K with a child over my shoulder. So, that's super important. Safety, again, is extremely important to everyone. One thing I did want to talk about, schools are not intended to be parks. If they were, they wouldn't be fenced. Sue Buell's currently fenced, Wortman Field's fenced, Memorial's now fenced. They're not intending for people to be out there, so unless something changes, the schools are not really set up, nor do they really want to be a park for the city. So that would need to change. Key objective A1 talks about striving for a 10-minute walk to a park. I was curious, what are the plans for like existing parks that we already have on the books? We have Corey Park, which is City of McMinnville property. It's already paid for. Is there a plan to use that? And we have the South Cozine, which is south of City Park right now. It seems like those are opportunities we could leverage, and I'd like to know how we intend to leverage those, because they're already paid for.
Yes, great assets for us. And I think what John will walk you through is, as we prioritize and determine where those park deserts are, that's where we'll lay out those kinds of, what exactly are we doing in this location? We haven't done that yet because we're still waiting. We need you all to do some prioritization before we get there. John?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's really what we've been doing all along, is inventorying existing conditions and then looking at capacity of existing sites and then kind of merging together, okay, here's what we've been hearing the needs are from the community, opportunities with this capacity that could exist. Are you likely to find a perfectly flat, perfectly designed, undeveloped park space that could have any number of features? Probably not. It's more often that we've got to figure out, how we're going to use something that has some challenges and may not fit or perfectly align with what the needs are, especially in a given location. So that's kind of where we are now. We know what the community would like to see. Now we've got to kind of merge together, available resources, potential future funding with existing capacity, including existing parks that are undeveloped.
Thank you for answering that. One more question. The 1999 Parks Plan hasn't been fully completed. We already talked about that. How much of that is intended to be carried forward? I'm certain there are still great ideas that are there.
Yeah.
What's the plan for that?
You should see those things carried forward, I think, in probably the next draft that you all look at, those things that we think the community has indicated they want us to do. I will say that one of the trends changed. Dog parks weren't a thing when we were back in 1999. The pickleball example that you just brought up, we have no idea how far that is going to go, but it's obviously growing. So we'll want to change some of those things. John, do you want to address any of that?
Yeah, I think any plan is not, it's not done once it's adopted. It's essentially a living document, and so needs change, trends change, growth fluctuates. So that's fully expected, and what we'll have with this plan, what the city will end up having, is phasing. So that's what we're asking you to help with tonight. What needs to happen first, what can happen maybe later on, and maybe what's visionary. It's going to take a ton of funding. It's going to take some big change for something to take place. And so that's what we typically see with a long-term plan like the 1999 plan. Some things are going to pick up speed and get traction. Other things are going to take a lot longer. They may not even occur within a 10 to 20-year time frame. But these plans continue to lay the groundwork, for those big visionary projects. Things like big trail corridors, large community parks. It takes a lot to put that together. So again, the plan will help with the realism of what's achievable short term, what is longer term, what is it going to take to make those longer term projects move forward.
And an example of something that might not move forward, Corey Park has been earmarked for a amphitheater. And that was before we had all of the residential development around there. So, we do want to do something with that park. There's a lot of conversations about what should happen, but my guess is it's not suitable anymore for an amphitheater. Yeah. So we're kind of pulling some things forward and being diligent about what we don't want to pull forward.
Got it. Okay. We have water and light property for that.
We have water and light property for that.
Yeah.
So, Dan, if you're done.
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
So we'll go to Mayor Drabkin if her digital hand hasn't fallen asleep by being raised for so long.
Luckily, I was able to keep my hand up there. I'm also cycling back to the bathroom conversation. I just thought it might be good for us to talk momentarily about the different types of bathrooms that we're looking at and some of the challenges that we currently have with keeping our existing restrooms open and why or why we need to also be thinking about investing in a different design. And if you could talk a little bit about the impacts of needing to invest in different structures, and then also how will that reflect on our current bathrooms, especially the ones that we're not able to keep open.
Yeah, it's been a challenge. That's one of the areas in parks where that safety issue really is challenging for people. If there's a sense of being unsafe or somehow in an enclosure, like a lot of our stick-built bathrooms are, really can heighten that sense of a lack of safety. The restroom facility at the J. Pearson Neighborhood Park is called the Loo. That was our first attempt at getting something in there. That particular architecture was designed with safety in mind. You can see if there's somebody in it. It's a single room that you can lock. There's only a couple of things you can do inside without getting spotted. The police can go by and see whether or not there's somebody sleeping in there. Those designs, and we talk about that in several of the objectives in here, is to design with safety in mind. So our thinking is the Loo is the model bathroom for us going forward in parks. once one needs to be replaced, or if we notice a particular spot, Mayor, like you mentioned, where we are having challenges maintaining bathrooms and keeping them safe, we would look for an avenue to replace one of the stick-built larger facilities with something that can have a safer feeling to it in our parks. Does that give that information?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions, Mayor?
Not at this time, thank you.
All right, and then I think I saw Councilor Payne had a follow-up.
I do, thank you. Council President, hopefully I'm reading all of this very detailed information correctly. So we have 358 acres of parks, and I'm reading, so D1 refers to the maintenance in terms of full-time staff and getting that down to 32.5 acres per FTE. Am I understanding correctly that that's one additional maintenance person is the goal? Because right now I believe we have 10.
Yeah, and I think David Renshaw would be the one to give you the best information and breakdown about the staffing levels there. I think the important thing here is to recognize that both of those need to be looked at when we're developing new parkland. So the number of FTE can change seasonally and other things, but yeah, it would be a slight increase over what we have.
So follow-up question to that, I think the volunteer numbers are great, and hopefully they're climbing back up after the COVID volunteer depression. But my follow-up question would be, is there any intent for any of those positions to be kind of a volunteer supervisor role where we can have somebody managing the volunteers, so that, because there's a lot of value in that. We have a lot of folks who care about the community and the parks.
Mm-hmm. And I think the mayor will appreciate this. She and I have had many conversations about this. For the last 2 budget cycles, we have requested a volunteer coordinator in our budget. And so it's all a matter of balancing and prioritizing, but we definitely know that we can leverage that better than we currently are. We see that gap, and we think that we can do better with it, and also really provide more opportunities for our community to give back. That's another thing we heard during the community engagement, is people want those opportunities to volunteer in our community, and they want to have them. So we're looking forward to growing that in whatever way we can, whether it's an FTE, continuing on the path kind of that we have now, which is not bad, but it's not capitalizing. It's more people come to us and we say, hey, how about you do all the underbrush clearing at West Hills for us this weekend? We'll come pick up the stuff. That's more or less the way it works right now.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Mayor has her.
Looks like Mayor has a follow-up question.
Yeah, I think I would just underline what Parks and Rec Director Muir said, that's a high priority for me. I see it as a really high impact investment for the city, and a way that we can leverage a lot of great work for a variety of the needs that we want to meet. And I know that the executive team has been working on creating a balance in terms of add-on packages or additional positions to be funded through the budget, but it's something that I would certainly love to see. I apologize for my hound dog. It was something that I would love to see come forward, because I do think it is a great multiplier for us.
Councilor Geary and then Councilor Peralta.
Just tagging on a couple of things. Dan had brought up a good point about sort of the unused identified parklands, but I also think about just sort of the surplus ones, like the Greenbrier Loop piece and things like that. What's the plan to make of those, and what capacity do we need to be involved in those discussions about those properties and the usage for the park, either it's as good opportunities to sell or trade, or to activate and use, or to, how do we hornswoggle those into successful opportunities?
John, do you want to take a swing?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's good timing. I mean, we are looking right now kind of park by park for opportunities for future projects. There are definitely several different sites, like you mentioned, that maybe they're not getting a lot of use. Maybe they would serve a better purpose for a different reason. But we're being very, very careful about also looking at those areas we've been I guess, calling tonight park deserts that may not have those opportunities, and just being very aware of, maybe that could be the thing that increases access to parks and recreation. Maybe it's a mobile play equipment that's brought in periodically. It doesn't have to be a big cost item, but that's what we're considering is, before we start considering divesting those sites, is there something that we can maximize their potential? But I think, like most park systems, that's definitely something that a lot of park agencies end up with, surplus land that's not really a great natural space. It can't really be a developed park for a number of reasons. So now what do you do with it? Can you, divest in it? Can you sell it? So I think that's on the table. But again, we're looking at this with the lens of, we need to make sure we're maximizing these spaces, because the key goal here is looking for areas that don't have great access. So could we potentially repurpose those sites for that reason?
Very good. The other one I had was in terms of thinking more about how do we manage and maintain the focus on the development of the plan. And has this plan, have we talked about in this plan, and have we talked about the possibility of, and will it be a recommendation to have sort of a standing Parks and Rec Advisory Commission created and formed?
Yes, that's in here, and you, some of you may recall that actually came out of some of the MACPAC work in the first phase feasibility study for an indoor facility. We talked about propping that up for this process, and instead went to the DEIAC and asked them to play that role for us, but I anticipate that would be one of the first things we would do post-approval of this plan.
Just to create a full...
Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. Mm-hmm.
All right, we got Councilor Peralta, and then we'll go to Commissioner Murray.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I support the mayor's comments about a volunteer coordinator, possibly shared between parks and community safety, so for future reference. Remind me again, when we're thinking about linear parks, is it true that we have not included linear parks to a significant degree in some of the subdivisions that we've added for lack of funding of maintenance of those linear parks?
We've certainly begun raising the issue whenever a development proposal comes through, and part of that is an extraction for open space. This happened on Baker Creek North, is how much additional parkland are we taking that would have an operational impact to our maintenance budget. So I'm not sure, and Heather may know this, I'm not sure we've actually refused any open space because of that, but we certainly do talk about it.
The language, like we're not adding linear parks in this project or at this time or whatever because of lack of maintenance funding, has I've heard that before, I think maybe from Heather.
We certainly have those conversations internally a lot.
Yeah, so there have been some lost opportunities through our land use process where we had the opportunity to exact land for future trail connectivity or something of that nature. We have, as a city, had a lot of internal discussions about it, and so the last two large projects, Baker Creek North and Oak Ridge Meadows, we did work with the developer to have that land not only donated to the city, but the improvements made on that land for the trail system, and then the HOA is maintaining it to 2032. And that was based on the fact that we couldn't do the maintenance for it today, but we didn't want to lose the opportunity to bring that into the system for the future.
Okay. So at least for those projects, we're anticipating carry forward an increased cost for maintenance to deal with that. Mm-hmm. Then what I'm also sensing is, and it's probably not part of this discussion, is a need to in addition to funding the bond and bringing in SDCs and whatever it is we're going to do to fund parkland, we also need sufficient maintenance for the land that we bring in, right?
Exactly.
Make sure that it's well maintained. And so that's not part of this process, I understand, but simultaneously we're going through the process of funding that, so I just wanted to.
I do think that comes under D2. So it is a part of this. I think the challenge that we're in right now is when the city hit hard times, I think about 10 years ago, the council knowingly had to make cuts, and one of the places where there were staffing reductions made was in parks maintenance. So we still have that backlog that you've been hearing about through the budget process, and we've been able to use some ARPA dollars to get some equipment and build that back slowly with the resources that we've been able to, but we still have a backlog, and my guess is during the next budget cycle, you will see us start to align those things better so that we can have those two conversations at the same time. What are we building and how do we maintain it?
So the one comment then that I want to make is that when we talk about like a park plan in 1999 versus a park plan in 2023, one thing that I think really changed during COVID is that people started valuing outside spaces more. And so from my perspective with parks, I would love to see more investment in the outside spaces and the maintenance of those spaces, even if that means, you know, maybe not doing as much with, and I know we're going to go through this exercise, but that includes like the funding for the maintenance of it and everything else. So,
Got it.
Thank you.
And then I think we had Commissioner Murray had a question.
Yeah, and Dan, I'm sorry I always butcher your name, but Commissioner
Tukolsky.
Tucholsky had mentioned, like, I just want to go back. I'm really stuck on the school potty situation. So school's not designed as parks, but like here is this infrastructure that's already there. Like, why can't we build upon that? And I mull that around my head, and I think of all the reasons, you know, who's responsible if someone gets hurt, who's responsible for maintenance, you know, all of those things. But is that not a partnership we can't endeavor to have to, you know, the wheel's already there. Let's just make it better.
And I think for those of you who've worked with me, you know there's not a partner I'm afraid to have a conversation with about that, and certainly the school district is at the table. I think just to highlight the importance of that, when COVID did hit, the school district was under different state regulations about what they could keep open and what they couldn't. Therefore, a lot of their facilities that we relied on to serve our community were closed. So to me, that's one of the examples of where we really do need to revisit that, because we wouldn't have expected that, yet all of a sudden we were the agency that had to provide tennis courts for the entire community, even though before that we had relied on the school district in Linfield. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about through all of this, but definitely leaning into our partners and talking about that makes a lot of sense, and we will do it.
And then my last question is, are there any current private partners that have come to the table that would be willing to do some large investments if there was maintenance involved?
I would say this gets a little bit to the volunteer, where we could eventually hopefully do things like adopt a park, and informally there are some service organizations that have basically adopted a couple of parks. But we definitely have Visit McMinnville at the table. They've talked about applying for grants for certain types of parks. We definitely have the partnerships and have included most of them in early on in this process. So yeah, sponsoring parks, those kinds of things are things that we definitely want to do.
Yeah, and we have a history of community engagement with that, like Rotary Park, which is Tice Park, and then J. Pearson Park with Kiwanis. Kiwanis raised a bunch of money for the accessibility piece of that park.
That's great. I was thinking more just like private money coming in and
Yeah.
for things. Wouldn't that be nice?
We take donations.
Councilor Payne?
Thank you. So my first maybe statement, sorry, John, is that Village Mill Park is not, in fact, a park. It is one of our undeveloped spaces. I don't know if that's relevant to anything. I know that that park, that space has infinite potential uses, whether it's someday housing or a park or whatever. I just want to be, it keeps showing up on the maps. And as a neighborhood resident of the Village Mill area, I'm, I guess, asking for some confirmation of what's going out to the public and what they're learning about.
So what I would say is it's used to be a developed park, right? And then we removed the infrastructure, the play equipment from that. However, it is still owned by the Parks Department and maintained by Parks Maintenance, and has the potential to have additional infrastructure in there. However, it is also one of those that has another park nearby that was part of the reason why I believe that the equipment was pulled out of there. So those are all the kinds of things that will be looked at.
And the slide got really hot.
Yes.
Good old-fashioned slide there.
Heard.
Not that that's relevant. Maybe that's a good spot for the youth that are reaching out to Mayor Drabkin asking for a trampoline park. Neither here nor there, just offering clarity. My question to that end is, with all of the dollars and cents conversations, is versus viewing two documents of our pros document and going to the dollars and cents conversations and the feedback that's coming from that, are those two documents going to be, or the two survey results, so to speak, going to be reconciled so that we're only seeing one document and really have a good grasp of what the population wants?
I think, and Jeff may want to jump in here, but the dollars and cents is related to all city services. So what I think that the budget committee and the council will be using that for is a springboard to prioritize things like parks. I don't see them necessarily coming together in the same document, except for the budget. That's where they'll come together.
All right, Sydney?
Just to follow up on Commissioner Murray's point about the parks and the school district, and following up on my question, is there a state level committee or anything looking at trying to incorporate school districts with it as part of the park and part of the land use? I mean, as we all are going through the UGB and everything else, and the Friends' concerns and my issues, my questions, is there anything on the state level to help make that go easier so that we can use the school districts as a resource?
There are not specifically related to that. However, I would say that I think we will have much more success working locally and not involving the state in that kind of conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, and when you brought up the fact with COVID, all of a sudden everything shut down, I'm like,
yeah,
that's a resource that we need access to.
And the school district could choose, they also can make the decision, just like there were times where we were making decisions, okay, we can open the bathrooms, should we open the bathrooms, do we have enough to keep them, the disinfecting going in there and stuff, so there were other factors in addition to the state guidelines. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Back to D2, is that number static throughout the life of this plan, or is that tied to CPI, or, I mean, $5,000 in 2025 is way different than $5,000 in 2040.
Good point. And I think this goes back to how this plan should be used. And again, it's always hard to see what you're going to end up with when this is just an interim document, but the plan document will talk about, how do we use this plan? It's not static. It doesn't sit down and, collect dust, but it's intended to be updated over time periodically for the reasons you mentioned. $5,000 per acre is, it's good now, but not too long from now it's going to change pretty drastically. So the goal would be that these types of objectives get revised, changed over time for the reasons you mentioned.
Okay, and then D1, it talks about reducing the ratio of maintained acres to 32.5 per FTE. What's the ratio currently? Or what's the percentage that's reducing it?
Know that number, John, off the top of your head?
I don't, but as someone mentioned earlier, and I can provide that, currently that's 1 FTE essentially. So that doesn't directly answer your question, but I can find out the ratio, but it's essentially saying it would be adding 1 FTE to reduce that ratio.
Okay.
I have the map right here. It's 35.8 is what 35.8 acres per FTE right now, if the information in the online in the parks plan is accurate.
Okay. So to kind of combo D1 and I think it's D5, the tiered maintenance system, is it really needed to bring down that ratio, or could we do other things to be more efficient in our maintenance processes, i.e. the new equipment we have from ARPA dollars, and then thinking ahead more of a design so we have easier to maintain shrubs and grasses, or maybe we turf some areas and transition to natural grass, and then that goes into forest lands, and so we're not watering that. It's green year round. We don't have to mow it. Things like that. So that's where I have concern about putting a ratio number in there when really we could potentially stay at the same ratio and just become more efficient.
Yeah, that's a good point. These two, as you mentioned, the D1 objective and D5, well, the whole category for maintenance and stewardship go hand in hand, but that's a really good point. The intent is, of course, as developed park acres increase, you have the maintenance staff to, go along with that. But yes, there are ways to be more efficient than just saying we need more help, we need more staff. Design efficiencies, as you mentioned, planning efficiencies, and then maintenance efficiencies, which is what D5 gets to. Some sites like City Park, it gets more use. You want to really have that looking its best versus, another site that's maybe it's more of a natural area. It doesn't need the, day-to-day routine maintenance that another site does. So the goal is that you're doing a number of different things to be more efficient and making sure we're keeping an eye on that ratio of staff for developed park maintenance.
Adam, I had a question for you about your question.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Garvin. So are you basically asking for a cost per service level, roughly, basically?
Not really a cost per service level, but just to not put a hard ratio in there of this is what we're trying to achieve from an FTE standpoint. I realize staff currently is, outside of their capacity for maintenance, but can we get them back within their capacity through efficiency instead of more bodies? And so if that's investing in, a new software for them to track their maintenance system better, or if that's investing in, different pieces of equipment. So maybe they're mowers that dump into the back of trucks instead of manually dumping grass in, so they can be more efficient and less wear and tear on the body and things like that. Because labor will always be our most expensive park maintenance piece. And so if we can get there through some upfront capital investment of equipment or design, I would rather be a leaner department with fewer FTEs that is very efficient through software and equipment.
And the natural environment that you build.
Yeah, the culture that you have within that department. So, but I'm not advocating to overload our workforce or saying they're not trying their hardest right now by any means.
What is the, sorry, can I?
Yeah.
What is the workforce level now relative to when you had it?
I would have to go back, I think it was about 2008 that happened, but they did have a very similar, the PowerPoints and information I've seen was very similar to this, so I can pull that up as historic information and email it to you.
Thank you.
Mayor Drapkin has her hand raised.
Oh, Mayor Drapkin?
Thank you. A couple of things. One for clarity. Advocate for a trampoline park. I just brought forward about 35 student requests for a trampoline park. Make sure that it was discussed. But more to the point, currently, isn't that a very high rate of acreage per employee? 35 does it include mow and blow, and then that just seems, from what I know, it seems like that's a very heavy load to be maintaining per parks employee. And so I wonder if you could talk about averages or national standards or recommended rates or things like that. So instead of looking at the number of where we're operating and trying to move up or down from that or create efficiencies, that we're understanding from the professional perspective
of where kind of generally these things should be, understanding that there's differences depending on what the park use is, how many plantings there are, all of the other amenities that may or may not be in.
Yeah, of course. This is a great question. Anytime there's a ratio, of course, where does it come from? You know, what are we basing this on? So what we started off was, with the, again, national metrics for a park agency similar to the size and scale of McMinnville. We do have some good metrics for that. However, it's still not a great reference. McMinnville is different from any other city. It's really hard to compare those. So fortunately, your great Parks and Recreation team put together a survey of similar regional park providers. I believe Oregon City, Medford, Grants Pass. There were, I think, Susan, 8 or so different park providers, much more similar to McMinnville in terms of population, you know, Oregon location and so on. And so we put all those numbers together, again, apples to apples comparison of maintenance budget, what are they maintaining, number of staff, and so on, and came up with a comparison between all of those different park providers with McMinnville. And so that 32.5 number, again, it's a reduction in what is currently taking place, but it's also closer to the average of comparable park providers, acres maintained per FTE. So we did look at a comparison. Again, it's more of a benchmark, getting McMinnville closer to a more realistic ratio for comparable park systems. But again, these we worked with the maintenance team to review these objectives. I think they had some good input. This is the refined version of what you're seeing tonight after we met with the maintenance team. But they all go hand in hand. They all kind of work off each other. You know, staffing, budgeting, design, maintenance protocols, and so on. So the input we got from the maintenance team was what you're seeing tonight, some refinements, but also, again, the comparison with comparable park providers.
And John, I want to do a time check on making sure we get to the interactive piece as well. I don't know if there's any more.
We should get to that if we have time.
Okay.
Yeah, we're, how long do you think that'll take, John? Should we move on to step 2, or is there any final questions somebody wants to ask?
Going once?
John?
And as I mentioned, we'd love to get, if there's anything else, you want to spend some more time, please do. We'd love to hear more about any changes or questions you have.
I can't see your name tag, Commissioner, but Randall.
Thank you. Just quickly on the community engagement, which I think is very important for this process. Looks like about 7% of the citizens responded to the survey. Could John perhaps touch on, is that typical for other agencies he's dealt with on surveys? And from this point on, will the community engagement continue to go on? Will there be surveys put out? Will this process keep going?
Yeah, so great question. First part is just in terms of the outreach process. This was intentionally, like I mentioned earlier, we did many different activities in person and online because we can't just rely on any one thing. It's nearly impossible. But with the survey, we do lots of community surveys all across the country, throughout Oregon. This was a really good response. We were very pleased with the response. It's all about promoting the survey. Susan and her team were going door to door, making sure people were responding. At one point, we even looked at a map of who had completed the survey based on where they said they lived, found out where folks weren't responding, and targeted that area. So in our opinion, it was good turnout, again, good cross-section. But I guess the question is, how much is enough? And the answer is that there never really is. But with what we see, survey alone was a great turnout, but that doesn't mean you're reaching hard to reach folks, people that don't usually take surveys, which is exactly why we did interviews, focus group, in-person meetings and so on. Second question, no, that was a lot that we did, but we're going to continue to do more outreach. In fact, we'll be launching a second online survey based on a very similar exercise we're doing tonight with you all. So again, we're putting this out to the community. We want to hear what their priorities are. Now that we understand what the community needs are, we want to figure out what needs to happen next. So we'll have that, and then we'll also have several different review meetings as we get closer to plan development and adoption.
I have to ask one more question. What is the total cost to install a loo?
The loo?
A loo.
The physical cost of the capital cost, and they bring it themselves and lift it from a crane. They give you a template to pour the concrete, and I'll do all the facilities ahead of time. The cost, I think, without the crane was about $140,000, and that was 6 years ago. And one of the reasons we did that is it was less expensive than the stick built that we had planned for there.
And then Councilor Chenoweth?
Yeah, I don't have any more questions. I just want to add my weight behind a couple of comments. There's some really good thoughts here and really good comments and questions that have come forth, but I just want to put extra emphasis on two of them. One, Commissioner Murray and Commissioner Tucholsky, idea of the concept that bathrooms don't need to be present in neighborhood parks because 10 minutes is close enough. I think that probably is not wise thinking, and one we should definitely be reconsidering in this process. And then the second is, Adam, your assessment that we should be looking at efficiencies and not hard coding in the FTEs. I would agree 100% with that analysis.
All right, with that, I think, John, we're ready to move to phase 2, the interactive portion.
Mayor Drabkin, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Mayor. He's got a closing question there.
No, I'm sorry. I forgot to take my hand down.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, this is the exciting part. I did want to say I really, our team appreciates, obviously you spent a lot of time looking through this, and we appreciate your feedback. This is extremely helpful. So what we'll do is we've got feedback from our committee from last week, obviously some great input from tonight to refine the strategic framework. So thank you for part 1. Part 2, I don't think we'll need as much time. Obviously we don't have that. So we'll make sure we get this moving, but I think this will be a lot of fun. This is your opportunity to be choosy. The goal here is, and again, we'll be doing this with the community, with the survey. It's to really choose options, but the goal is to kind of force trade-offs. We're at a point now where we have to start funneling down ideas because we can't do all of these things. So what we're going to be doing is review different projects. We're going to identify different cost scales. So again, start to figure out, what do we want to take on if we can't have it all? And then we'll start to look at locations too if we have some time. So that gets back to the map that someone mentioned earlier, looking at access to parks. So before we turn it back over to the interactive activity, just a quick overview of what your options are. And these are all in your packet, so I just wanted to quickly provide an overview. We summarized these into 4 different categories, and these all came from the planning process to date. So connections, play and gathering, reinvestment, and nature. So pretty general topics, but you'll kind of see how these projects fit in to these 4 categories. And what we're going to ask you to do tonight is make some decisions based on what these projects typically cost. And these are very general ranges, what we call kind of planning level cost ranges. Again, just to give you some background on, what are the impacts. So we've got low to highest, and you can see the ranges here, less than 50,000 all the way up to $1 million plus. Can you get more bang from your buck? We'll find out. So, quick overview of what those projects include: connections, trail amenities and signage, exercise stations, safe routes to parks, riverfront trail, a loop trail, and a pedestrian bridge. So these are all projects under this category, and again, things we've heard from the community that we've heard a desire to include with the plan. Play and gathering, lots of different options here. Small bike skills park. So these, again, weren't really a thing in 1999. Basically an area to play on your bike, off-road. Community garden, sport court, an inclusive play area. So this is a park, much like J. Pearson Park, all abilities, folks with or without disabilities, for a variety of different special needs and special purposes. So inclusive play area, a dog park, gathering space, so picnic area, seating area, an event space like an amphitheater. This is a covered kind of band shell, and then a new park. So an entirely new park, and included in that category, just because of the cost, is a destination play area. So a large-scale play area that really is a community-wide draw, if not a regional draw. Reinvestment. So these would be things that are caring for aging facilities, deferred maintenance, and so on. Lighting improvements, irrigation or landscaping, restroom. So this would be replacement of a restroom, facility repairs, and then accessibility improvements. So things like curb ramps, accessible routes to different features within a park. And then the last category, natural area improvements. So adding trees. This is where I mentioned we would offer wildfire risk management, so either landscaping or other measures, interpretive elements, access to the river, stewardship projects, water-wise landscaping, and flood mitigation projects. So a little bit of everything. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ellie Schaefer, and this is where we begin our interactive portion. You're essentially going to vote on these different projects with these different categories. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellie, and Ellie will start the interactive portion.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. If the Zoom host could give me screen sharing privileges, that would be great. In the meantime, while we get that set up, hi, I'm Ellie. I'm a planner working closely with John and Susan on this parks plan. The activity we have for you tonight is sort of a live polling. So you can use either your phone or computer screen, tablet, any device. And for any members of the public that are on, we're asking only the commissioners and council members and the mayor to participate in this one this evening, and then the public will have the opportunity for a similar exercise on our online survey that's coming out soon. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. You should have received an email earlier today. It looks like we already have 10 folks participating. But in your email earlier today, there is a link or a QR code that you can use to access the site called Mentimeter. If anyone is having any trouble accessing it, please do raise your Zoom hand or physical hand, and we can get you connected. So I'll give everyone just a second. We've got a practice question set up here, same format of some of our later questions, so you can test it out while we get everyone connected.
Anybody having any trouble? Looks like we're good to go, Ellie.
Good? All right. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and start with there's an 11th person. Great. I'll start with our first question then. And for the record, most popular, playing with family and enjoying nature. So our first set of questions, we're going to be looking at a broad map of the whole city. John went through those 4 categories of projects, and we want to understand which areas of the city might have slightly different priorities than each other. So what you'll see on your screen, you can tap on the map to see the full view. What you'll see is that we've divided the city into 4 general sections. These are just for use in this activity. They're not based on any formal boundaries, but just to help us break down the large city into smaller sections. So what we're asking is, and we'll do this for each of the 4 areas of the city, which of the project types do you think are the highest priority? We're starting with Central McMinnville, so the dark blue outline, including downtown, Linfield, over to Joe Dancer. What types of projects do you think would be highest priority for that part of McMinnville? Just a reminder, we've got connections, that includes trails, safe routes to parks, play and gathering, different play opportunities, picnic, whatnot. Reinvestment in existing facilities, and then access to nature.
Even you didn't vote for that.
We're all guilty.
All right, looks like we've got 11, 12 folks responding. Sounds like we're having some fun.
Vote didn't count.
There was only 2 options, not 3.
The Chads were the 2001 plan.
Great, well, it looks like reinvestment and connections are rising to the top for Central McMinnville as highest importance. Let's go ahead and move on to our next quadrant. Now looking at Western McMinnville, so west of downtown, kind of south and west. Same 4 types of projects.
Wait, south and west?
You did Central, we're on West.
Yeah, we're on west now. Your screen should automatically change the next slide. Looks like connections are less of a priority over here and much more responses for nature. Play and reinvestment falling kind of in the middle.
For the playing gathering? Oh, that's already happening. For the water feature?
A few more seconds for a few more folks. It's like 13 people have responded so far. And we'll pause after we go through all 4 and have a chance for you.
I think we just have a few more questions for everybody.
Yeah, about why you voted the way you did. All right, next area, Northern McMinnville. So kind of spanning east to west across the whole city boundary, but north of downtown. Connections and play, different combination up here. Cool to see. Much fewer responses about connections to nature for Northern McMinnville. Okay, a few more seconds on this one. Anyone's putting in their answer? Right. Done. Last of 4, Eastern McMinnville. So this is really the area, south of Joe Dancer and east within the city limits. Shown in green. Right, again, seeing good amount of consensus, connections, and planned gatherings, highest priority. All right, so before we keep going, our next set of 3 questions is going to be about prioritizing different project types by those cost categories that John mentioned. But before we get into that, I'll pause, and if there's any questions or comments, discussion around why folks think different priorities are important in different parts of the city, we'd love to hear what you think.
We're good to roll.
All right, we'll keep it moving. And again, feel free to send other thoughts after tonight. Okay, so priorities based on cost. Just a quick recap of those categories. And for these questions, I think we've combined high and highest just for the sake of efficiency, but low would be less than 50,000, moderate costs between 50 and 250,000, and then high and highest would be 250,000 up to $1 million and more expensive than that. So the point of this slide is to choose up to 4 costs that fall into this low, 4 projects that fall into this low cost range that you think are most important or highest priority. And now we're just talking about the city as a whole, not for any portion of the city in particular. So we'll go through each cost level, and then you can choose fewer options as we get more expensive, just to simulate kind of that real conversation that needs to be had around budgeting and short-term versus longer-term priorities. Like shade trees, highest priority so far, followed by water-wise landscaping. Some other natural feature improvements are rising to the top as well: wildfire risk management, natural resource stewardship. And it looks like interpretive elements are lower priority, generally speaking. And it's not that all of these can't land in the plan, just this is a helpful tool. Your input, use input on what's near term versus longer term.
Don't rush it.
All right, we got 14 responses. I'll go to moderate cost next. So here you can choose up to 3 projects that you think are highest priority within this moderate cost category. Here's where we have restrooms, which I know was a big topic earlier this evening, rising to the top. Not too much interest in dog parks. Like 12 people, maybe a couple more seconds on this one. Safe routes to parks, also really important priority. All right. I know we're running a little late on time, so I'll go ahead to our last question, and then we can have one more discussion point if anyone wants to provide any more insights. Last one is high cost, high and highest from your packet are combined on this one. So again, you can choose up to 3 of these project types. Great. River access and riverfront trail, I'll note those are two separate ones on this question. River access maybe being more of non-motorized boat launch or fishing dock. Both that and riverfront trail look like high priorities, as well as facility repairs. So reinvesting in existing facilities, play equipment, sports fields, etc. that maybe are older. And interestingly, not much priority at all for another inclusive play area or accessibility improvements within parks or flood mitigation. All right, that is 14 responses. I think that's most of everyone who's been responding so far. Thank you guys. It's helpful, especially with this big group, for us to just have a chance to really kind of do a little bit of polling or voting and see where your priorities are. With that, I will stop. That's our last question, and we're happy to answer any questions about cost or location or priorities, or hear any comments or thoughts you might have before we're done for tonight.
So John, I don't know if you have any closing remarks. I'm sensing that we're ready to be done with this agenda item and move forward, understandably. Thank you for the extra time that we got tonight dealing with this. It was a great conversation. John, anything you want to add?
Just really quickly, yeah, thank you, and Ellie, thank you for running us through the activity. Hopefully that was helpful. It's helpful for us. Again, we'll have that community survey soon, doing a very similar activity. Just thank you so much for the time tonight. I know we're a little over, but it was very helpful for us, and hopefully helpful for the city as well. And just to say, the next time we see you all, we will have a draft of the plan to talk through. So we'll put together everything we've done all the way through tonight and beyond to finally get through to the home stretch. So we're looking forward to that. We've got a lot of work to do, but wanted to thank you again for both Planning Commission and City Council and Mayor for spending the night with us tonight to talk through some important issues. So we appreciate your time.
All right, with that, I just want to say thank you to the Planning Commission for taking the time to join us tonight, all the great questions and dialogue. I know you guys have a heavy workload, and we appreciate what you guys do, and thanks for putting in the extra effort tonight. So with that, I'll adjourn our joint work session meeting at 7:46 p.m. The council will go into the conference room for a close to the public special called executive session pursuant to ORS 192-660-2A to consider the employment of a public officer, employee, staff member.